And the president continues to rail against Democrats for delaying sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate. A new report details the very issue that led to his impeachment. The New York Times claims President Trump repeatedly rejected his national security team's advice to release hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid for Ukraine. The report says, quote, in late August, Defense Secretary Mark Esper joined Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, the former national security advisor, for a previously undisclosed Oval Office meeting with the president, where they tried but failed to convince him that releasing the aid was in the interests of the United States. Now let's bring in Ben Tracy and Siobhan Hughes. Ben Tracy is, of course, my fellow CBS News White House correspondent traveling with the president in Florida, and Siobhan is a congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. First of all, does this new reporting, do you think in any way that this will change the White House's approach to having White House officials cooperate and testify?
Yeah, well, what's clear is that Democrats feel the report in the New York Times today certainly strengthened their position. The Senate Democrats want 4 individuals to testify, 2 big-name ones, Mick Mulvaney and John Bolton, 2 lesser-known, Robert Blair and Michael Duffy. Those are the subjects of the New York Times story this morning. And so Chuck Schumer had a tweet out this morning very much insisting that these are the 4 who need to come. We got a lot of new detail about the nature of the withholding of military aid, new detail about how far back the process went, starting in June. That August meeting you highlighted was significant because it shows a very high-level attempt to get the White House to release the aid. That meeting with Mr. Trump himself, although, of course, unclear whether or not the White House is going to back down, its history has been certainly not to.
Got it. And Ben, is this at all likely to change the calculus for Republicans and the president when it comes to having witnesses testify at a Senate trial?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge we have a couple protesters back here, so you may hear some people shouting some things, and obviously they have a sign, so we'll all just put up with that. But to answer your question, for Mitch McConnell, he has always made this argument that opening this trial up to witnesses kind of opens this Pandora's box, and you never know what's going to jump out of that box. So he's been trying to dissuade the president from this notion of putting on a big defense with live witnesses because it becomes very unpredictable. And this sort of article really bolsters his argument in terms of, do you want these people dragged up to the Hill and have to testify, because the president may want his witnesses to defend him, but then the Democrats will also get witnesses that might reveal things the president and his team does not. So I think you might have Mitch McConnell saying to President Trump, hey, look at this. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you.
That's a good point. Siobhan, Republicans are, of course, at odds with the Democratic strategy to withhold these articles of impeachment. And take a listen to what Democratic Congressman Joe Kennedy and Republican Congressman Steve Scalise said on Sunday.
It's not her role to go over to the Senate. She could run for the Senate if she wants to be a senator. But the House has a role. The Senate has a role. It's time for the Senate to do their job. Look, for months, she was saying how important it is. They've got to remove this president immediately. He's a threat to their whole way of life. And then once they pass the impeachment, she doesn't want the Senate to get the papers to start the trial.
I think the Speaker should do what's necessary in order to make sure that there is, in fact, a fair proceeding that takes place in the United States Senate.
Siobhan, what are the risks for both parties if this delay drags out?
The risks for Republicans are that more information could come out that would be damaging to President Trump. And the reason that's a risk is that there could be some on-the-fence Republicans who now may not be eager to hear from witnesses but could change their minds. We already saw Lisa Murkowski come out. There was some indication she might want to hear from witnesses. We don't know where Mitt Romney is going to stand. There are certainly at-risk Republicans in 2020. For Democrats, the risk is that they look a bit hypocritical, frankly. One of their strongest arguments in favor of proceeding with impeachment in 2.5 months was that they needed to act urgently, quickly, because the president was trying to undermine the 2020 elections. By not sending up the articles of impeachment, they seem to be saying, in fact, they may not need to act urgently.
And Siobhan, are Democrats on the Hill thinking at all beyond impeachment and the kind of agenda that they'd want to pursue in 2020, especially because we're heading into an election year?
They're thinking about the agenda, and they're thinking also about messaging. There was a flurry of activity in December before Democrats went home. One of those things, for example, passing a U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal. Look for them to message that heavily. Work on prescription drugs. Look for them to pound on that as well. And so Democrats certainly are interested in showing that they can juggle not just impeachment, but also priorities for the country.
And Ben, before we go, we know the Trump administration has been monitoring North Korea for any sort of missile activity that has, of course, been threatened around Christmas, a possible Christmas gift to the U.S. And we know Kim Jong-un made remarks. So what is the latest on North Korea?
Well, this is something the White House is watching very closely. Kim Jong-un right now is presiding over this multi-day meeting of the Workers' Party in North Korea. And as you mentioned, Kim Jong-un had promised this kind of unwanted, ominous Christmas gift to the U.S. Christmas has come and gone, but really this is more in the time frame of North Korea has said there is an end-of-the-year deadline to get some movement with the U.S. And basically what North Korea wants is relief from sanctions. The U.S. has made it pretty clear that that's not going to happen. So we're at this impasse. And what everyone is watching for now is Kim Jong-un every year gives a New Year's address where he kind of lays out the strategic direction for the next year. And you very well may see him in that address say this moment of diplomacy with the U.S. is over. We're going back to our testing of ICBMs and nuclear devices. White House officials have basically been saying we're just kind of waiting and seeing what happens, then we'll determine what our response is.
Ben and Siobhan, thank you so much for joining us.